Hey, welcome to this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series. So, one way to improve a maybe older mock, or maybe kind of give life to a newer one, is by giving them a companion, or a vehicle, or a spaceship, or a speeder. And that, of course, is what this episode is all about today. So maybe you finished building a character, but you feel like you could do a little more with them, or you think the character's super cool, but they just need that little bit of extra zing to go with them, to really make that character even more awesome. Well, why not make them a spaceship, or a vehicle that can go nicely with them? And so again, that's what we're going to talk about today. You know, we've seen the Alaxia T9 or the Thornatus V9, and realized there were so many 9 vehicles in Bionicle. But both were great sets, really awesome vehicles. So maybe you want to take some inspiration from that, or take some inspiration from the spaceships and vehicles we're going to talk about today, and that stuff can inspire you to make your own cool speeder bikes and spaceships and vehicles. So let's talk about some of those today. The first one that we have today is by Socketball and is called Future O//IE. So what's cool about this one is that it uses a bunch of Technic, Bionicle, Hero Factory, System, and even some of the old hockey construction pieces. So it pretty much uses everything. So always remember that you can seamlessly combine all of these different types of parts, and definitely play around with pretty much everything in your collection, because like we see on this mock, you can kind of almost flawlessly combine all of them into one really solid, awesome looking mock. So one thing that I imagine this mock is doing is obviously a little bit difficult to figure it out because there aren't any sort of breakdown images or anything, but I imagine the majority of this is built around a Technic frame of some kind. So he's most likely used a bunch of sort of Technic beams or different things like that to just simply just build a sort of rough sort of scaffolding or frame that everything else fits around. So once you've made that sort of general frame, you can easily build off of that. I always find that's a really good starting point for spaceships, is to make that frame and then build around it, and then the rest of the spaceship just kind of forms around itself, which is pretty awesome. So that's definitely one good starting point, and most likely what he's done on this mock, or the other alternative if that's not actually what he's done, is just simply finding ways of linking each of the individual parts. And this is relatively simple to do. You just kind of go off the individual connection points that are on each part and just find what connects to that, and then slowly the rest of the mock just sort of forms itself. So one thing that's quite unique and fun about this mock is the fact that it's built for a Technic figure. So ages ago, Technic sets used to come with these Technic figures, and I believe the reason they stopped making them was simply just down to the fact that when people were buying Technic sets, they didn't really care about a scale, and so building them to this Technic figure scale just wasn't necessary anymore, and so for them to build sort of larger or smaller scale Technic sets, they just got rid of the sort of Technic figure, and which is a shame because they were really posable, really awesome, and really fun. And you know, I've seen this in a few mocks. We'll see another one quite soon, actually, that use these Technic figures. And so, yeah, maybe you want to kind of build a cool-looking vehicle made with Bionicle pieces, but you don't really want to make a Matoran or a Toa or an actual construction character. You could use some of these Technic figures, and they're super cheap on Bricklink. And I mean, I have a few that I just got through like bulk lots and things like that, so you might have some laying around in your collection, and they're just fun to play with because they're so posable. So if you've got some, why not consider doing that too? Make a speeder or a spaceship for those Technic figures. I'm sure they'd love it. So some cool things on this speeder bike that I like so much. The mask on the front of the vehicle there forms a nice sort of shape for the front of that speeder bike there, because, you know, that Liwa Nuva mask does have its quite unique shape to it. It's almost kind of like the, you know, the front of a car, how they can be quite smooth and oddly shaped and stuff like that. I think that's a fun little addition there that gives it this nice kind of, yeah, interesting look. Also really like all the trans orange highlights on this mock, really gives it a nice pop of color, and also really cool how it's sort of focused on the front there. Kind of looks like headlights on the front of a speeder bike, or, you know, headlights like you would see on your typical car in our world. And that's a fun kind of parallel, and it looks really nice. And we also take a look at the sort of accent of dark blue on here as well, and how it kind of forms this almost sort of chair for the mock as well. Very, very nice, very fun. A really cool mock that uses a whole bunch of different pieces. I think that alone is really, really cool to see. So fantastic work, Socketball. Let's move on to the next mock, which is by Dave Foreman and is called the Ampera Helios, which is a cool Star Wars-inspired aircraft made for Matoran. So one thing that immediately grabbed me with this mock is the fact that it uses canister pieces for parts. Now, you may still have some of your old canisters lying around from your Bionicle sets, or maybe they were grouped in with the bulk lot of Bionicle that you bought, or people are just straight up giving them away because, you know, not everybody really cares for the boxes that LEGO come in. But the good thing about a lot of the Bionicle canisters is there were various connection points on them, and this was one of the best ones because it had a whole bunch of them on it. This was, of course, the canister piece that came on Huki Murray. So all of the Toa Murray had this specific canister piece in multiple different colors and things like that. And yeah, it makes a really nice piece that you can easily use. But you could have done that with the original Toa packaging or the Toa Nuva packaging. Pretty much any of the packaging you could have played with and used in some way. It's pretty cool. So that's something to consider. Try using some of those pieces. And one of the cool things I think that Dave has done with this is the fact that that piece is such a large piece. And so starting off with a large piece when you're building a spaceship like this is a really good idea, because you can use it as a way to kind of just cover a lot of space. You know, depending on the size of the spaceship that you want to build or the scale that you're aiming for, you might have to build quite big. You know, I referenced the Alaxia and the Thornidus before. Those are quite large sets because they need to fit a typical Toa-sized build in them, so they had to be a little bit bigger. And, you know, if you're aiming to fit a larger character into it, you may need to cover a bunch of space. So take a look at some of your larger pieces and start playing with those, because then you can cover a larger surface area, but not use too many pieces. You know, that's exactly what the Alaxia and the Thornidus did. They were quite large sets, but they used a lot of larger pieces. And so a lot of the mock itself was actually quite hollow, but it was all very strong and well built. And, you know, a lot of people always say, like, oh, I wish I could build that, but I don't have enough pieces. Well, you can take some notes from Lego and focus on building more sort of hollow designs, but really well-structured designs. And then as a result, you get a really large-scale mock, but you're not actually using too many pieces. So what Dave's done here of using this canister piece is very smart, using those larger pieces like that. And heck, it doesn't even need to be a canister piece. It can be, you know, like we see on the back with these engines here. Some of those have some larger pieces used there. Or it could even just be some other larger Bionicle or CCBS pieces, you know. For example, a large CCBS part is the Onawa chest piece from Bionicle G2, or just, you know, any of your larger Bionicle or system or Hero Factory pieces. Play around with those and see what you can do. So this specific speeder primarily uses more Bionicle parts compared to what we saw before, which use a bit more of everything. This mainly seems to focus on Bionicle with little hints of system. And I think that's fun, especially too because it's made for this Matoran scale. And so I think that's something to do if you're kind of hesitant about the sizing of your vehicle. Build for some Matoran, build for a little smaller scale like that, because it's a bit more manageable, a bit more easier to do. It won't require you to make a huge Goliath-sized ship or anything like that. You can build to a manageable scale. So some fun little details on this mock include the awesome-looking engine at the back. So I like how the windscreen pieces have been used here, getting these two X-Wing pieces and sort of angling them like that to form this really interesting kind of cockpit or windshield-looking design. And also the snazzy-looking leather tan interior using these shield pieces in tan. Looks fantastic. It very much looks like a fancy sports car, having its beautiful leather interior and everything like that. It's very nice, very cool. There's a lot to love about this mock. Very nice. So let's move on to the next mock, which is by Anthony Wilson and is called Deep Sea Salameh. So this obviously is a mock inspired by the theme Cyber Slam, which is a very fun theme. It was a Technic theme, but actually a really cool one. I did buy one of those sets when it came out. They're very fun. So this one mainly uses system. So we've seen a mock that uses a mesh of all different types of pieces. We've seen one that's more Bionicle focused, and now we're going to see one that's very system focused. So already we can see that there are multiple different possibilities that you can do when you're building your spaceship. It doesn't matter what kinds of pieces that you've got, there's ways that you can do it. It doesn't even matter what sizing you're aiming for. We've seen a sort of decently larger one, we've seen some very small ones, and now we've seen probably the smallest of the lot. It's all pretty cool. So I think using system is a good idea because there's a couple cool things you can do with it. One, primarily using system, and maybe say you're building for a Bionicle character, or you're building with this Technic figure here, because here again, we see another Technic figure. But sort of having that distinction between Bionicle and system is an interesting way where you can really easily differentiate between the ship and the character. You know, having one be a very different texture with the system pieces, but having the character be more Bionicle is a really solid and good idea, because naturally the two textures would be different. The character is more organic, whereas the ship is made of metal, or whatever kind of metal that you want it to be made out of. So naturally they are going to be different textures, or different sort of shapes and sizes and things like that. So I think doing that, making the distinction with system and Bionicle is an interesting and good idea. Plus, using system allows you to really focus in on details, which this mock very much does so. So let's talk about some of those. We take a look at the back here with these sort of different fins on the side and also on the top there of this awesome looking spaceship. Using those system pieces there, you're able to achieve those really interesting angles using some of those clip pieces, but also you're able to get those interesting stripes and things like that in that little nice stripe of teal in there. It's very, very cool looking. And of course, you wouldn't really be able to do that with Bionicle. Getting those really, really tiny details like that is just something that you need some system for. Speaking of system, being able to use more colors is always a welcome addition with system. You know, teal and this sort of purple or magenta at the back there is not really a color that, well, there are some Bionicle pieces that exist in that color, but if you're using your system pieces, you very much open the possibilities of pieces that you can use in funky colors. You know, for example, I don't think we ever had any sand red or sand purple pieces with Bionicle or CCBS parts. I don't even think they make those colors anymore, but besides the point, if you want those pieces, you'll have to use system stuff. And if you're using primarily just Bionicle, you're not going to be able to use certain colors, or you'll at least have more pieces in those funky colors that you do want to use. So that's something to consider. So this is an awesome spaceship mock by Anthony Wilson. Again, really cool to see a mock made for a Technic figure. Let us move on to the bonus and final mock in this episode, which is by Connor Keith. This was a submitted mock called Kohuru Miriwa, the Silver Assassin. So this mock mainly just uses Bionicle parts, but is building to a Toa scale. And one of the things that he's done here very effectively is, you know, obviously if you want to build a larger spaceship to fit a larger scale mock like a Toa or even a Titan or something like that, you're going to need to build quite big. But if you do like this and you just build a bike or something that's not necessarily that huge to begin with, it works really well. You don't have to worry too much about the scaling of that. So building this awesome sort of speeder bike bicycle inspired sci-fi looking kind of design of some kind is really, really awesome and cool to see. And it's very much something that you could do yourself, is to give your mock a cool motorcycle or a speeder bike or something like that. It wouldn't really break the bank using too many different parts, but man, your mock would look so much cooler next to an awesome speeder bike or motorcycle or something like that. Very much something to consider. I mean, heck, one of the coolest sets we ever got was Furno with his bike from Hero Factory. Why not make your mock have a cool bike like that? So another thing about this mock, I was speaking before about the Technic frame that I thought was in the first mock here, and we kind of see some of that again with this mock. You know, we take a look at the front of this speeder bike here, and it uses these Technic beams to sort of form the basis of the front of the bike there. And yeah, without those Technic beams, it'd be a little bit more difficult to make. And again, it forms a sort of basic shape, and you're able to layer around it. And I'm sure for the most part, we can pretty much see that there are more Technic pieces being used to form the frame on the back of this speeder bike too, where he sits and everything, where the engines are and all that. So do that. Get your Technic beams out, whether they're the system ones or these sort of more lift arm style ones, and just build a basic frame. Don't even worry about detailing it yet. Don't worry if it looks good or not. Just kind of get a basic frame. Kind of be like, yeah, this is probably roughly how big the back will be. This is roughly how big the front will be. This is where I'll put the fins and stuff like that. And then you just got your frame done. And then from there you go, actually, no, all right, time to start layering this up and making this thing look really pretty. And you start shoving armor on, putting in greebles and details and engines and turbo boosters and wings and things like that. Pretty cool. So that's a way to approach making a spaceship mock. And as well, giving it a stand like this is a great idea, because then that way it can look so much cooler. If you have the stand even be a little bit posable, you can get some cool poses out of it. And then also that too, if you kind of have an awkward shape to the spaceship, kind of like this, where, you know, the actual front of it kind of goes down, you're able to pose it in a way that, you know, it's not kind of top heavy or anything. You know, like if you were to just rest this on the ground without the stand, it would kind of be sort of tilting up a little bit. Whereas having the stand there, you're able to have it posed in a way that it would naturally be posing if it's flying through the air and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. So there we go. That was 4 spaceship vehicles or speeder bikes, whatever you want to call them, in this BIS episode. Hope you enjoyed this BIS episode, and I hope you enjoy the others to come. If you want to submit your own mocks to the show, of course you can. The way to do so is the email that you're currently seeing on the screen. Send me some pictures, send me some information on your mock, and then I will put it on the show in future. Also, while you're there, be sure to take a look at the other links in the description to my social media, and consider checking out my Patreon page as well. Thank you very much for watching this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series. I will see you in the next one. Happy building. Bye for now.